Membership has fallen below 50% for the first time since 1900. 56% of adults report attending religious services seldom or never. Only 30% report attending religious services almost or every week. The Pew Research Center does a lot of surveying, and you can see it from the period 2007 to 2023 that the percentage of adults who identify as religiously atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, that category is what's called the nuns, doubled almost. And it's been more pronounced through younger generations. I'm a boomer, and so our generation these days is 26% are of nuns, but the Gen Z is almost half. So it's definitely a striking phenomenon, and it has been most pronounced since about the 1990s. It doesn't hit all religions, however. It's mostly been amongst mainline religions. Look at this line right here, the main line. And that's been a real drop, while almost in concert with the rise of the nuns or no religions. But Black Protestants, other faiths, and Jewish have been fairly consistent, as have Catholics and evangelicals, although there's been somewhat of a decline in those. Because we have Canadians with us, I wanted to look at what was happening in Canada. And the report I found was that Canadians reporting no religious affiliation or nuns doubled in the 20 years from 2001 to 21, going from 16.5% to over 34%. Church attendance, once up in the 67% in the 1950s, has plummeted to about 11% today. Even the strong evangelical group saw attendance halved since the 1990s. There have been generational shifts. Younger Canadians, in particular, are less religious than older cohorts, with religious non-affiliation being more common, interestingly, in provinces they mentioned, like British Columbia. They also identified 3 factors that they thought accelerated that dechurching from the 1990s. One was the end of the Cold War. They noted that we had put "In God We Trust" on the US currency and "Under God" into our Pledge of Allegiance, suggesting something synonymous between being an American and being a Christian. President Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, reflecting the idea that Christian America was facing an existential threat to our culture and way of life. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it became more culturally acceptable to be both American and non-Christian. Their second factor was the polarizing religious right, the rise of Jerry Falwell's moral majority, Pat Robertson's challenge to the elder Bush's GOP, and I misspelled it, Newt Gingrich's contract with America. US Americans in the political middle began to associate these movements with Christianity and moved away, joining the nuns. And then, of course, everyone's boogeyman, the internet. In the 1990s, the internet cafe was born, and connections in public libraries became available. So young people particularly, could engage in a wide range of worldviews and collaborate with others, questioning their faith without risk of social and familial opposition. So I would want to ask you, if you became dechurched at some point in your life, what was the cause for that? Can you all take a moment to reflect on that, and then I'd welcome a couple of people to raise their virtual hand and share your thought on that. When you've been dechurched, what was the reason? Steve, can we hear from you? You're muted. Can you unmute?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know that I'm part of any particular trend. I just began to think for myself in junior high school, eighth grade in particular, ninth grade especially, and I developed an interest in philosophy. And the more I reflected on what I had been taught as a good liberal Catholic, my parents were not dogmatic or oppressive in any way, the more I thought, I just don't see any good reason to believe any of this. And so I became an agnostic and then later on an atheist. But it really wasn't consciously, at least, about broader reflections on society. It was about my own individual reflections as a thinking person.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Well, I'd like to come back and find out what it was that got you back to Unitarianism. Thank you, Stephen. Uh, let's hear from Terry.
Sure. I grew up in a really strong Baptist family, and but by the time I got the last year of high school and first year of university, I just couldn't believe this stuff anymore. It just didn't make rational sense to me, and so I really felt like I had to disassociate, and so I lost a lot of uh, uh, all my high school friends basically, and my parents were not all that happy either, and so. But I joined within a couple of years. I joined the local Unitarian church. I guess I felt guilty sleeping in on a Friday, Sunday morning, so I could at least go to the Unitarian church. And
That was a painless way to get back to it.
yeah, I didn't have to say things that I just couldn't believe. So that's my story.
Okay. Well, thank you. Lincoln, can we hear from you?
Yeah, I'm a multi-generation Unitarian, raised as Unitarian, fell away after college or in college until I had a child who came home on Easter weekend talking about Jesus being resurrected. And I said to my wife, well, we got to find ourselves a church.
Uh-huh.
But I have been really de-churched, really now, for the most part, because of the Article 2 banishment of the seven principles.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And Mark, let's take you as the last one.
Sure. I was hoping that someone else who wasn't part of the board would speak, but for me, the story was that I took it all too seriously. So I was an eager young nerd studying the Bible and memorized the Gospels, had done all the serious stuff, learned Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, all of that kind of stuff, and started to realize that the things we believed just were not reasonable translations of the original languages. And I started reading all kinds of other classical literature and realizing that, hey, these stories, there are hundreds of stories like the gospel stories in what we would call the myths. And so that made me really wonder about things. Of course, going to university and encountering people who really understood evolution and could argue me into the ground, that was quite an experience. I'll pass on. I think we've got a few others.
Okay. We have Dick, and then we're going to stop here. Hi,
Yeah, I
Dick.
guess my experience was just more typical. Once I got to college and through graduate school, I just wasn't involved in, I was still a I guess you could say, but was not involved in church. I was just being a student. And as soon as I got off um, graduate school and settled down, went right back to the church. So I think this is a very common experience from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So it's half unchurched, but half not unchurched. So it wasn't from one religion to another. It's just an absence, and then got back into it.
Thanks, Dick. Okay, I see one more hand and then we're going to stop. Danny?
Thanks, Joyce. My reason, I was raised very, very, very Catholic. I got a dose of the conservative pre-Vatican II Catholicism, and then in Catholic high school got a dose of the liberal activist Catholicism. So I got the whole palette. And I went to a Catholic college where I was drugged and raped by a priest. And that does not encourage one to stay with a denomination.
I can understand that. Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. Well, for the next phase, I'm going to share a video by Ryan Birch, who has done a great deal of research on this topic and many other topics in religion. And he wrote an article called "Religion as a Luxury Good" that caused all sorts of attention. And his information about who goes to church these days really surprised me. Let me share that video with you, and I think it'll provide some interesting. Now, where's my video? Here. Aha. Oop. Hold on, I forgot to hit the little buttons. Mark, you told me to do that, and here I just forgot. The two little buttons. Okay.
So my understanding of what non-religion is changing.
Is everybody getting this?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Sound quality is good.
Pretty significantly in the last couple years. And really what I'm zeroing in on, especially in the last year or two, I wrote a post for my Substack called "Religion as a Luxury Good."
Yes.
Which went viral, quote unquote, whatever that means. Like not like millions of clicks, but a lot of clicks for me. And so I make this argument that religion has become part and parcel of people who have done everything right, quote unquote. And what I mean by that is college education, middle class income, married with children. If you check those four boxes, it's also called the golden path. That's what a lot of conservative economists call that, the golden path. If you meet those criteria, your chance of having good income, good outcomes is much higher. You're much more likely to go to church. This is what people don't understand is the more education you have, the more likely you are to go to church. The more the ideal combination of income and education are college degree, 4-year college degree, making between $60,000 and $100,000 a year. So for me, what we're seeing to me is the haves and the have-nots are growing larger and larger every year. I think this is a serious problem, both pastorally, but also from a social science perspective, because the nothing in particulars are the fastest growing religious group in America today. They were 14% of America in 2008. They're 23% of America today. Amongst 18 to 22-year-olds, 1/3 of them identify as nothing in particular. That's the plurality, by the way. The most likely choice amongst college students today is nothing in particular on surveys. Now, here's what's shocking about them. Half of atheists have 4-year college degrees. It's only 25% of nothing in particulars. So they're not, when we talk about the nuns, we need to spend a lot more time talking about the nothing in particulars because educationally they're falling behind, income-wise they're falling behind. They don't trust other people. They don't engage in the political process. They're basically checking out of every aspect of American society, while churches are now filled with everyone who did everything right, good income, good education, kids, married, all those things that the nothing in particulars are not doing. So I think we're seeing this terrible bifurcation, right, in American society of the haves and the have-nots. And for a lot of nothing in particulars, it's going to be harder and harder for them to move into the middle class or upper middle class because they don't have those social connections that church provides. And I think that's how I'm thinking about this more and more is they're feeling left out, left behind, lost, cut off. And that is really bad pastorally, spiritually, but also economically and democratically, little d democratically for American society.
Yeah, I remember that article when I came across it on your feed. And I linked to it in my weekly newsletter on Friday called On the Rise. And like lots of people went crazy over that article. And first of all, great title, Religion is a Luxury Good. Like, great. Got me. But, you know, there was a lot of substance behind it. And I think so many myths got broken down, like this whole idea, don't send Junior off to college. They're going to deconvert. They're going to, you know, believe in evolution, et cetera. That whole line that we've been fed for decades now apparently is not true or not universally true. Yeah.
No.
So, yeah, explain that. Even let's start there because I want to dissect. You just shared a lot of information. I want to dissect it. So this whole idea that the uneducated, the not very wealthy, the non-successful people bail on church, and that Ivy League probably all became Democratic progressives, you know, not true, not true, not true, not true. So let's start at that point.
Yeah. So I think what the real, like, this all sits in the foundation of a concept, trust, a really simple concept, but like so incredibly important for a functioning society is just the idea, can I trust another human being? Like that's how democracy works. It's the glue that holds us together.
Yeah.
You know, if I can't trust another person, then I'm on alert all the time. I don't want to share. I don't want to pay taxes. I don't want to engage in the process. So it's not just interpersonal trust though. It's also institutional trust, which is like, do I trust banks? Do I trust media? Do I trust politicians? Do I trust the church? And what we're seeing more and more is that trust is very strongly related to education. So the more education someone has, the more trusting they are of other people individually, called interpersonal trust, but also more trusting of institutions, because you got to think about institutions have served them well. They got a college degree, which allowed them to get a job at the big Fortune 500 company, which allows them to have a good income and feed their kids and have health insurance. So if you don't think this institution works, you're not going to get involved in that institution either. Everyone's out to get me. Everyone's, you know, looking for their own advantage in life. And I think people with educate, now it's hard to figure out causally what's going on here. Does getting educated make you more trusting, or is being more trusting more likely for you to get more educated, right? That's the causal difficulty of the whole thing. But the end result is the same, which is that you've got a lot of high income, high education, trustful people. And then you got a growing number of people who are just checking out from everything because, oh, the pastor's just trying to get more money to buy a jet, and the media's trying to feed me a narrative, and politicians are just trying to fatten their pockets, right? Everything is cynical. And I think that is the overarching meta narrative of the time that we live in, is this cynicism and pessimism and distrustfulness of every institution. And I think it's not just tearing the church apart. It's tearing every institution that we have in American society apart. And the problem is, we don't have a direct line for how to rebuild trust in American institutions.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm probably part of the system, according to a lot of people, 3 university degrees, you know, the whole deal, generally a very trusting person. It's really interesting to think about, you know, is it causal or is it correlative? It's a great question. I don't know. Obviously, you know, my experience is that. But your argument, which was so intriguing, is the people who tend to still be around in the church as 2024 opens are the people who aren't cynical of everything, who are better educated, who have higher incomes. Therefore, religion is a luxury good. And I think there's still a popular idea that, you know, the people who are a little more populist, a little more distrusting, they've prepared for the apocalypse with their storage of, you know, water and all the tablets they need and ammunition, etc. You're saying those people are deconverting faster than anybody.
They're checking out from every aspect of American society. And that is, like, for instance, we ask questions on surveys, have you put up a political yard sign during this election cycle? Which I think is a great question, by the way, because it's like,
that is a really
It's
interesting
like the most
question.
basic political thing you can do. It costs you they'll give you one for free. You literally, you know, just stick it in your yard. Nothing in particulars. Almost none of them put a political yard sign in their yard. Atheists, this is fascinating. Atheists, half of atheists gave to a candidate or campaign in 2020. Half. You know what it was amongst white evangelicals? 26%. 26%.
Wow.
Atheists are incredibly politically engaged. This is why I don't worry about them from like a social science perspective, FYI, because they're engaging. They have good income, they have good education, they're engaging in politics, and they're trying to change society in their own vision of what they think is right. That is all good things from a social science perspective and political science perspective. That's exactly what we want in a functioning democracy. Nothing in particulars are saying, you don't work for me, you don't represent me, you can't even see me, goodbye. Like, I am done with everything that you're involved with. And that kind of disaffection and dissatisfaction and hopelessness is really caustic in a functioning society. And one thing we know about, especially about economic mobility, right, which is just the idea that can you move up in class from the lower class to the middle class to the upper class. The number one predictor of economic mobility is being in social networks with people who have a higher economic mobility than you do. They basically build the ladders for you to pull yourself up to the next rung of the economic spectrum. And one of the last generators of economic mobility, we know this, there's a study published last year that looked at like 42 million Facebook accounts. The number one place where you find economic mobility is not school, because that's based on neighborhood, which is, you know how that goes. And neighborhoods are based on economics, and even your workplace is based on economics, because blue-collar people work with blue-collar people, white-collar people work with white-collar people. The only place where you find true economic mobility and diversity is houses of worship. That's the only place. So by not going to church, you are the rungs that would get you to the next level of economic mobility. There are no rungs there because you are not allowing yourself to be in places to get you to the next level. And that's terrible. You know, it's just terrible because they're in their own, and I don't want to blame anyone for their own poverty. Like, don't hear me wrong, but like at some level, you got to find a way out. And church used to be a great way out for a lot of people who needed help. And now those people have no way to reach out for help because they're not part of anything anymore.
I'm going to pause there and move just slightly to skip over and see if I can get to 3430. He's got an interesting story to tell.
The civil and civilization, because I think you're right, that distrust, mistrust, that's a big issue.
Let me tell you a story. I'm a pastor at heart, so I'm a storyteller at heart. When I went to Greenville College, which is a free Methodist school, liturgical, I grew up like low church evangelical Southern Baptist, so I had to like learn about liturgy, right? I went to St. Paul's Free Methodist Church in Greenville for church one Sunday morning, and they had this thing called Prayers of the People, which I think is great. I think more churches should do it.
We used to do it back in the day when we were small.
It's such a cool, so what happened, for those of you who don't know, don't grow up in this tradition, the pastor basically starts with like a little short prayer about like pray for the country and pray for the denomination or the community or whatever. And then he opens it up to the congregation. And then most people say like a 1 or 2 sentence prayer, like, please pray for my Aunt Kathy, she's got cancer. And then the pastor will say, Lord, in your mercy. And we all say, hear our prayer, right? It's a really nice like affirmation of the community and all kinds of cool stuff. Well, I was at church one Sunday, and this guy walks in who's younger than me, and I was in college. So this guy had to be like 18 years old. And his girlfriend or wife was with him, and she had a baby on her hip. We were doing prayers of the people. And, you know, typical stuff, pray for Aunt Kathy, pray for Aunt traveling, you know, all the kind of stuff. And right before I was going to close up, the guy in the back says, could you all pray for me? I lost my job, and I don't know if I can afford the rent this month. Pastor says, Lord, in your mercy. Congregation says, hear our prayer. Then we go on to the next part of the service because that's how you do it in liturgical church. After church was over, one of the older gentlemen in the front went straight back to that guy in the back and said, son, I own the lumber yard in town. If you want a job, you can come work for me tomorrow. And I thought, that is what has been lost in American society over the last 20 or 30 years. Because if you speak a need into a group of people who have been trained, equipped to help other people, they are going to move heaven and earth to help you. And we don't have spaces like that anymore in American society where someone can speak a need into a group of people who are equipped and ready to help. And that is really the encapsulation of the problem that we're having now with income inequality, with political division that we have, the polarization that we're dealing with is We forgot the fact that other people are human beings that want to help us. They're not out to hurt us. And that young man, God bless his courage, right? To say that into a community of people. And then God bless that other man to step back and say, I don't know you, but I want to help you because this is what I've been, trained to do over the course of my life. That is what we're missing. And that is why society is struggling. Like, I don't lay in bed thinking about the decline of the Roman Empire. I think about the decline of American society. And I think that, to me, that's a much more pressing issue for us right now. And specifically in my place, I think about the role that religion used to play in American society and does not anymore, and what we're missing because it's not there.
Okay, a lot in that. For me, the idea that education and religious affiliation are correlated surprised me, because I think some of you said the same thing. When we went off to college, we started exploring other ideas and we stepped away from the religion we were brought up in. So that surprised me. And I particularly enjoyed his story about the young man who stood up and said, I need a job, and somebody helped him in the church. That happened in the church here a few years ago. A young man in our fellowship stood up and said, I lost my job and I need a job. And the man who helped build our church, the contractor, hired him. That's a real story. So let me ask then another question for you to reflect on, and I'd like some people to step up and offer their response. Is this loss of religious affiliation also a social and political problem, as well as a spiritual one? Are they part and parcel of the same decline of our trust? Joanne, can you unmute?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can indeed.
Okay, great. I was actually surprised that he pinned it all on church, because there's so much discussion about how we've lost a lot of other communal organizations, like, the Elks. There's so many, the Moose Lodge, my mom and dad, when they grew up, they had, they said every weekend a different group would host dances, and they just go to these different dances, and that was affiliated with my dad's church, but not all of them were. A lot of them weren't. And so I'm really surprised that he pins it all on religion, because I don't know how you could separate that out from how we've moved away from other organizations as well. But I will say, growing up in the Catholic Church, there wasn't that kind of like, if my dad said he has a problem, I mean, it was just a big church. Nobody ever got up and spoke. It was just the priest speaking, and that kind of stuff never happened where I grew up. In my UU church, though, I will say, yes, that did happen. And so I think there is value of the church, but I just was really puzzled because there's so many other organizations that could do the same thing for you. And he just pinned this all on church.
That's probably a fair statement. He's a minister, so
Yeah.
that's his focus. But yeah, thank you. Remember the book Bowling Alone? Do you remember that book? It was written by the professor at UC Berkeley, I think. I can't remember.
Robert Putnam. He's a professor.
Thank you. Yes, Robert Putnam. And his point was, we used to join the PTA, we used to bowl, we used to do other kinds of things, and then along came television. His argument was television came along and kept people at home watching TV. So Bowling Alone was the name of that book. It was a good one. Thank you, Joan. I appreciate it. Let's hear from Kevin.
Yeah, this is all really interesting. So I mean, I haven't seen anything in what you presented so far to convince me that what we're seeing is sort of like some grand shift in sort of the overall amount of religiosity among the population, right? By which I just sort of mean, people's inclination to hold, sort of spiritual or supernatural belief. Everything that I've seen is data about participation in institutions, right? And I think, like, if you're going to study this sort of academically, you've got to distinguish between those two things. Two observations I'd make about that. First, there's always been, or at least I think, in mid 20th century America, there were a lot more people who participated in church activities who were not necessarily particularly religious. I think of my mother, who was half Jewish, growing up in a small town in the South. She just went to the Methodist youth group because that's just was the youth group. She wasn't particularly interested in belief, just all the kids went to a youth group, and so she had to go to one, and there was no synagogue or Jewish group, so she went to that one, right? I think the mid 20th century, you saw a real norm of participation in churches, but I don't know that meant that people were more or less religious than they are now. The other thing that's just never tracked in this kind of data are people who are religious, in ways that just are never institutionalized. And the most obvious, form of that is New Age religion, right? One of the women I studied with, in my religious studies program in grad school, had made a career of studying what she called metaphysical religion, right? And it's like, there are no New Age churches, but there are New Age bookstores. And you go into those bookstores, there are a lot of books, people buy and read these things, right? So there's always a lot of religious sort of activity going on that's just not a communal, institutional kind of activity, right?
Mhm.
Um, so, coming around to sort of the UUs, what's interesting to me is I'm sort of having trouble kind of reconciling this Burge guy's argument about a luxury good and religious people being upwardly mobile with the chart that you showed that shows the largest decline in the main line, right? Because I sort of tend to think of the mainline churches as sort of the kind of the not terribly religious kind of respectability churches, right? And those are the ones that, are declining. And you would sort of think that's who would decline if the shift here is not so much overall religiosity, but just, the sort of the need to participate in church, right? It's just not a social expectation on a Sunday that you're going to go to a church anymore. And so the folks that are most likely to drift away, would drift away from the churches that aren't all that, kind of enthusiastic. And I think of those as the mainline churches.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of like, economic mobility, kind of bringing this home to sort of UUs, like one thing that I've always observed about UUs when people are asking like who are Unitarian Universalists, like just demographically, we are people who make money off of our education, right? We're professionals of one sort or another. I'm a software professional. A lot of you guys, are academics. There are a lot of teachers and things like that. And one thing about that sort of that milieu is that we tend not to actually really be in particularly good position to offer jobs to people, right? Like I've never met a UU who owns a lumber yard, right?
Oh, okay.
I just, occasional sort of small business types, but generally not, right? And so I think that, like people have never sort of come to UU churches, in order to I, I mean, it may like if you're already sort of an educated professional, it may help to network among other educated professionals, right? But we tend not to sort of offer that kind of help to folks. And I'll just say one last thing. One thing that a lot of evangelical churches and like Pentecostal churches, also like prosperity gospel churches, one thing that they offer to people who are really hurting economically is the promise of divine assistance, right? And again, we just don't do that.
No.
You know, like that's just not something, like you don't come to UU church thinking like, wow, I really need to get right with God because that's going to help me to live my life better and to not struggle economically, right?
True.
We've
Yeah.
just never been that niche. So anyway, those are just a few thoughts that came up for me. But
Well,
I'm enjoying.
thank you for that. I will say in our little town, we have quite a few people who are business owners in a Unitarian fellowship. But that may be because we're in a little town and you can't be a professor here. You have to find something else to do with your life. Thanks. Hi, Danny. Let's hear from you.
Thank you. I can see the point to all of the different arguments that have been made, including by that presenter, for all of these various things being factors. But my strong belief is that the biggest factor that is breaking down churches The rest of societies and families is an economic system that puts money ahead of human relationships.
Hmm.
And that's my piece.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that thought. Patricia.
His premise is fascinating. I don't know whether I agree with all of his points, but I would just love to get in there. I don't do statistics anymore, but that's part of my background. And I would love to get in there and do some kind of multivariate analysis and start tossing out factors. You know, you can do path analysis and figure it out and sort out correlation from causation, for example, and figure out what happened first and what caused what. And it's not a definite answer, but it's predictability. Even a simple regression equation would give you some idea on what are the most important factors in determining this and what aren't. So, you know, that's what I found when I was listening to him, that I would love just to get somebody in there and say, just run an analysis for me and let's see what falls out. Um, the other thing that I'm surprised he didn't mention, because I think it's responsible so much in the last 5 years for the lack of engagement, and that's the obvious: social media. I mean, people, you don't even know when you're talking to a bot anymore. And people engage on Facebook and think they've got a relationship. I've got 1,000, friends, and of course they wouldn't know you if you walked up to them because they're Facebook friends.
Mhm.
And it's a very shallow relationship in most every case, but people don't even see that. So they have no personal engagement. And that's what I think church offers. I was once one of those militant atheists, and it's been about the last 10 years that I've begun to see the role that religion does play. And contrary to what whoever was just talking a minute ago, McCullough, I think that going to church is a good barometer of religiosity because a religion has practice in it. Religion's not just theology. And so if you talk about practices, it's going to some place to meet with other like-minded people. Now, in the case of Unitarians, we don't have anybody that owns a lumber yard in ours either in our church. It's mostly academics. Um, but as long as I've known about UU, we've been working on social class. We've always known that social class was a big issue. And I've watched like homeless people come into our congregation, and some of them will come up and at candles even ask for money, and they don't get much response.
Oh,
And people might go over to them later, and we've gone over and empathized with them and said, "What can I do?" etc., but not monetarily, not helping them economically. We can empathize, but it doesn't go much further. But anyway, I wanted to go back. That social media issue, I think, is a big one for the lack of engagement. And with the whole thing blew up with COVID. It just got worse and worse and worse. And now you've got the incels out there that don't even know, they don't even have a single friend. So, that's a lot of the issue.
yeah. And with AI, it's going to get worse. Yeah. Thank you for that. Let's hear from Mike.
Thanks, Joyce. Pat just stole some of my thunder, and you did a little bit yourself. But when you referred to TV, I think it's less TV, although that might be a tiny bit. But it's more the internet in general. And one thing that I noticed, and here 30 some years ago, I retired from the military, and and then I happened to go into sales work, which is what I did mostly in my life, and both military and civilian, that I noticed that the younger people in particular, they were sorely lacking in social skills. Okay. And then the advent of the internet to begin with, and then social media, even more so, that enabled them to not have to physically commune with anybody. Okay. And all they have to do is open their iPhone or open their laptop or get on Facebook and like Pat was just alluding to, they got all these friends, but they're all Facebook friends. They aren't all personal friends. And then I think the politics that most of us are overwhelmed by, encourage us to only hang out with people that we agree with, and I don't know about you, but I have a lot of neighbors that are, blue collar in their social class, but they're more than a little conservative in their political views. Okay, but we just happen to live in the same apartment complex due to the economic social class, and that kind of brings us together. But yet then on the other hand, in a lot of parts, if you can, people choose not to socialize with people that disagree with them. And I think that's a problem because they lack social skills and they don't have to practice their social skills. All they have to do is send text messages back and forth with people they agree with. Okay, and then assume that people on the other side of the political divide, they're evil or they're bad or whatever. Well, how many, you might ask a Unitarian, how many Republicans do you actually know or socialize with?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something to, and there's a good chance that there's probably several Republicans that live down the street from them, no matter where they live. Anyway.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you'd look hard for a Republican in my fellowship. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Mike. Let's hear from Jerry and Kathy, and then one more topic I want to move to. Jerry, no, Kathy and Dave. Jerry. No, I'm sorry. I'll get to you, Jerry. I hit the wrong button. Kathy and David.
Yes, thank you. There was a professor here in Canada a number of years ago that did some studies and came to the conclusion that at least in Canada, we were moving into what he characterized as a post-secular age. And what he meant by that was that the push towards non-religiosity had lost its trust, and younger generations and those that had been, let's say, turned off with conventional religious options were moving into a place where, or mental emotional space where they were searching for spiritual answers to life's big questions. We're not satisfied with atheism as such, or even humanism as such. Tended to be unlikely to go to congregate settings under the impression that membership would cost them more than they could afford, because in their younger years, trying to find work to give them an income where they could, have the luxury of contributing to a congregation was limited. Also, resonating with the trust factor, people exploring for spiritual answers are authentic in those searches, expect and search for depth rather than stones skipping across the surface. They really want to find themselves going someplace with their searches. So institutions or let's say communication settings where those possibilities can thrive tend to be more attractive. So I think different ways of presenting spiritual options for people who are authentically searching aren't necessarily settling on any single place right away, but do expect depth and are looking for it. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you. That's an excellent segue to the next question of, does this offer Unitarianism an opportunity? Thank you. Jerry, last comment.
My thoughts. may take us a slightly different direction, but in reading Pew research and Gallup data, I always come across the fact that it shows that people are less and less likely to believe in the Bible much at all, or to believe the metaphysical claims that, or in our case, that Christianity will save you, and that this is a huge phenomenon that people, after these many decades, are now less and less enthusiastic about what we might call the product of the church, salvation, belief in supernatural powers of Jesus of Nazareth, that that this has taken many decades, but now there's for whatever other reasons that may cause people to claim no religious affiliation, that there is a huge theological component to it. And these thoughts are echoed by a number of what are called sometimes derisively death of God theologians, but specifically a fellow named Gianni Bottimo in Italy. Bottimo starts with a V, but Gianni Bottimo really echoes this kind of thinking and saying that people in general, large numbers, no longer believe the extravagant claims of religion to be the only religion, to save your soul. And so, to some extent, the nuns, the clearing out of the churches, is people experiencing less and less confidence that church has something for them. I think where that leaves us, the Unitarians, is okay to look at our product and make very sure we're standing on our heads. The other thing that I come across continually is the growth of people called progressive Christians. I'd encourage everyone to read their website. You would swear that their core principles were written by a bunch of Unitarian Universalists in the 1950s. They have no interest in a divine Jesus. Again, it's progressive Christianity or progressive spirituality. They were started mainly by radical Catholic Matthew Fox and then Bishop Spong, who many of you probably know. But these are people who still nominally consider themselves Christians, use the word God, think of themselves as religion, but they don't go to their mainline church anymore. And again, they sound, when you read their website, I encourage you to go to progressivespirituality.com or progressivechristianity.com and read their core principles. It's just amazing, the similarities. And of course, some of them are nuns. We advertise ourselves at Flint as we oftentimes have on our front sign, progressive spirituality, progressive Christianity. And, you know, we've been getting away with that. We talk about Jesus, the man. We're trying to intentionally make sure that people understand that we have an interest in the human Jesus, and many, many other things, of course. And, you know, no one's left. We're seeing some growth because we're trying to appeal to the nuns. Of course, this takes a very a group of a congregation who's willing to consider, because the word Christianity can drive a lot of folks, especially Unitarians, crazy. But the folks who consider themselves progressive Christians aren't Christians in the Orthodox sense at all. It's just a very, I think the nuns is a very a group of folks we should definitely look at, and most of them a lot of them are very gregarious, might come back to a church if, in my commercial language, the product is there, and the product is standing on your head in terms of the staff, in terms of what you put out. It's true what people have been saying, the internet takes our audience away. People can find all sorts of engaging things to do and be gregarious in other ways. To attract people to church nowadays, there's no more just sloughing off. It has to be a message that is engaging. I guess that's probably pretty obvious, but those are my thoughts tonight.
Thank you, Jerry. Another good segue to ask the question, is this an opportunity for Unitarians? And so that's the last segment I'd like to talk about. We answered that. Oh, wait a minute. I'm missing some things here. Pardon me. No, I'm not. Okay. Sorry. Excuse me. I got confused there. That asks that question, or is there an opportunity here? And I looked at another resource called The Churching. The first book was The De-Churching. This is The Churching of America. These folks looked at religion as an economy, as part of a marketplace, and asked the question, what were the winners and what were the losers and why? And they came up with some points that I think were useful. Any religious organization that drifts or moves from the core principles and practices that facilitated growth in its inception will be replaced with another organization that maintains or revives those original standards. I think many of us feel like the UUA moved away from its core principles, and we have moved on. The next point was the displayed beliefs are not nearly as crucial as practices and the group's integrity to those practices. I think the disfellowshipping of ministers within the UUA was a practice that drove many of us away. Any church or religious organization that stops being unique in an attempt to fit in and reduce tension from the surrounding culture will soon cease to grow and eventually begin to decline. So that leads me to the question of how are we unique? And what does that mean that we have to offer this religious marketplace? I'm going to draw on what I would say is our 3-page Bible at our new fellowship. Many of you may know I'm a member of the Salish Sea Fellowship, which broke away from Quimper Unitarian Fellowship, which was at one point a vibrant fellowship in our little town, led by this minister, Bruce Bodie. And then it followed too closely the UUA line, and we left and started a new fellowship. And what I would say is our 3-page Bible was written by Bruce Bodie, the minister at the time that built the wonderful church we once had. And he looks at core ideas of religious liberalism or a free faith, individual freedom and responsibility in answering life's most important questions, such as who am I? How am I related? What is good? What is the nature and aim of being? Diversity of belief and pluralism, encouraging the full flowering of the individual, yielding a diversity of belief to be celebrated. Dignity, worth, and value of each, promoting the liberation and cultivation of each human spirit by encouraging the art of active listening to one another. The idea that truth unfolds over time, encouraging individual beliefs to be developed, deepened, re-examined, and adjusted. And I'm going to add in parentheses, through community dialogue, we have a very active educational program like the Academy within our fellowship. And it's the discussion in those classes that really helps us, I think, come closer to the truth each time. And embracing duality, holding that faith and doubt, belief and knowledge, religion and reason, ritual and rationality, sacred and secular, mysticism and science are not in opposition to one another. So that's Bruce Bodie's idea of what a religious liberalism or free faith is. And then that speech that many of us maybe heard by Peter Morales, Is It Time for a Hospice for Liberal Religion? He said, can we find ways to feed the hunger for meaning and community? One thing is certain, we can't do church the way we always have and hope for different results. So the need for what we do at our best is enormous, addressing social ills and the loneliness of despair, which he noted in that talk was reflected in alcoholism, drugs, and suicide. And we need to move beyond the congregation as the form. Not that it goes away any more than the desktop computer goes away, but is complemented by new forms of connection. So we need to find new forms of connection.
And Franz Schubert's overture to Rosamunde, performed by the Chamber Orchestra of Europe, and much more year after classical companion to the holidays. I'm Keenan Farman.
What are we hearing?
Somebody's got their
can you
their
mute
microphone on?
Mark?
Please mute your microphone.
Mark, you can mute them.
I don't have host privileges. You have to make me co-host.
Oh, Terry, can you do that?
Who is it again? I just.
If you make me co-host, I can do that all.
Okay.
We at this new fellowship, the Salish Sea Fellowship, we after this talk that he gave at our fellowship actually before he gave it as an academy program. And he spurred us to think about how we would do church differently. And so based on some of his suggestions, we have started asking our pulpit speaker, we're lay-led, we don't have a minister. We ask our pulpit speaker to greet people at the front door. We expanded our joys and sorrows with an acknowledgement of an important event in our larger community. Perhaps it's how many people showed up at the food bank this week as a concern. We have member pledges that meet our budget. So our collections each time are going to community organizations. And we started asking a representative of those organizations to come and introduce their work and their needs. And that's been very well received. And I noticed that the collection plate has grown. We hold services only on the first and third Sunday with a speaker gathering in another room after coffee time to discuss the sermon. And that's gone off very well. And all the speakers have been quite willing. Last week, I think we had more than half of the people that came to the service went into that other room and sat around for another half hour talking to the speaker. We have the second Sunday, we have a community potluck. We don't have a service, we have a potluck. And we follow it with a video, a TED Talk or something, and a discussion. We've tried that once, and that turned out to be well received. The fourth Sunday, we instituted a game day, and that response has been mixed. We went outside during good weather and had outdoor games. That was popular, but indoor games have been less popular. The fifth Sunday, which happens 4 times a year, we started having home fellowship where we gather in a home and watch a sermon. It could be a Todd Eckloff sermon. It could be whatever the host wants to share. And then many people have suggested having a bring a friend to church day. We haven't tried that yet, but that's the common advice that people donate to charity, they vote, they do lots of things because somebody they know asked them to. So that's another thought. But this is all in aid of his suggestion that we need to do church differently. So my question here is, NAUA as a virtual organization is just such an experiment. What is working and what isn't? I'm going to stop sharing and ask that question. Are we doing Unitarianism differently through NAUA? Does that work? Annie?
Yes. I am relatively new to Unitarianism of any label. And I was coming in right as the split was happening. I was in a congregation that was heavily slanted the UUA due to secret machinations behind the scene. And I am not at all happy with that whole mess and would not have joined had I known the things that were done to me. But at the time, my health was not good enough to be sharp enough to catch what was going on. That has changed, and I have been for about 3/4 of a year participating in various NAUA things, and this is what I thought I was joining. I wanted liberal religion. I didn't want wokeness shoved down my throat, even though I'm trans and I agree with a lot of the ideas. I do not agree with manipulating or forcing people. That I find that highly offensive. And it's the opposite of liberal religion.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah.
This is refreshing. This has helped me keep my sanity and regain my footing. And I have not dropped my membership. I intend to call UUA to account, my local congregation, and the whole damn thing.
Okay.
So there.
Well, thank you. Kevin.
Yeah, I think, the challenge, it's a real challenge for us as a church that tends to attract socially awkward introverts to be a place that people want to hang out. And and church, like, it has to be, for you to have a really vibrant community, you need to build relationships between people. You need to build, intimacies and friendships. And a lot of our churches really, really struggle with this. And this has been the case for a long time, I'm one of these folks who's a product of the youth movement, in the 80s and 90s. Why are you you? And and a lot of us, like the youth groups, we were really, really, tightly bonded, and our youth conferences were just fun, right? And it was a kind of sort of like kind of often sort of nerdy, irreverent fun, that you just sort of couldn't have in high school, right, back in the 80s. And a lot of us would sort of like come out of our youth groups into the adult church and be like, this is Squaresville, like what, what is this, sort of supposed to be offering us, right? The church that I go to right now actually is a very warm and welcoming church, and it's and I can't take credit for this. They were this before I got there. I think it's great. I'm doing my best to sort of kind of help to facilitate that and promote that, because that's what it sort of needs to be. But if this is if the sort of the rise of the nuns is just part of this broader trend of people sort of moving away from like socializing in person, you know the challenge for us is that we need to to find a way to be a place that people want to come and really sort of form relationships, not just sort of like talk superficially about ideas, but sort of get to know each other on sort of a deep level. As far as NAUA is concerned, I think it's really challenging to do this over Zoom, to get the kind of intimacy that we really need. It's just sort of hard to do, and we're just there's only a handful of us, and we're kind of scattered around. I think we need more just person to person FaceTime, personally.
And that requires starting something new, possibly, which is a challenge. We did it here and we were lucky to be able to, but it's not easy. Thanks. Let me hear from Jerry.
What did you say, Jerry?
I did.
Yeah, just briefly, what I think of as our 3.5, 4 year experiment here in Flint, where we voted strongly against the Article 2 changes, voted unanimously to become a member of NAUA. Several other votes made it clear people were very interested. But still, I think people are pressed to really, really be able to articulate a difference between the UUA brand and NAUA. Yes, they know that the 7 principles, and we have a lot of folks who are very adamant about that aspect and are glad that the NAUA worked to preserve the 7 principles, but still, nothing shouts to them I think it's because being people, no matter how many times over the last 3.5 years that our services and our sermons have carefully, in a non-boring way, showed the profound differences and changes at the UUA that don't seem to be Unitarian Universalist at all, that in spite of all that gentle education and people saying they're getting it, there's still not that, there's no depth of understanding and the big difference. And I think what Danny said reminded me that I sometimes think NAUA needs to advertise themselves as liberal religion without the anger, or liberal religion without the illiberal without the illiberal woke. If you want to go all the way, but to make it distinctive in the language of today, you've got to wade into that. I don't mean gotta. I mean, I know this is tough stuff, but I'm trying to figure out why after 3.5, 4 years at Flint, where people are pretty much on board and know the many things that happened at the UUA that, well, and my wife, co-minister, worked for the UUA, has documented and talked about in her sermons, that still people don't see a big distinction. And I think that's important, and it may take some out there language to move people. And that's all I have to offer. And I know that's a heck of a lot that's a big mouth to chew on.
Jerry, I couldn't spotlight you because your video's not on. But
I'm sorry.
I would ask you, is your church still affiliated with the UUA?
Yes, what we've tried to do is to say, let's do it both and listen to both sides of the story. They're pretty receptive to that. And, the idea is that we could walk the middle line and keep an open mind, walk the middle line on all sorts of issues to find the truth where it oftentimes lies in our polarized world where people don't want to walk the middle. And it's worked pretty well. And I think the next step would be, I spent my time. I'm sure the next step needs to be to draw a very, very firm distinction between NAUA and the UUA. And I think a lot of times it's the lack of anger and the religious, illiberal religious behavior that comes out as being angry at, I don't know, angry at the white race, angry at everything, it seems like at times. But I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. That's interesting to know. And Mike.
Thanks, Joyce, and thank you, Jerry, for alluding to the 7 principles. A lot of you know that I'm a huge proponent of the 7 principles, which is the reason I'm still here after everything that's happened, and we've all been through this. And the little white church that I used to belong to, that I no longer belong to, because they agreed to just roll over and follow orders after Article 2 was blown up last year, the summer of 2024. And then I said, well, I can't hang in there if you're still going to be affiliated with the UUA. So I left. I still go there from time to time because I got a lot of good friends there, and they like me, I like them, but I can't be a member. And then I became a member of the NAUA in the hopes that NAUA takes that money that's been left on the table for a couple of years now, when the UUA moved away from the 7 principles, and say, to retain those of us that are still here by officially adopting the 7 principles. And Lincoln Baxter, early in this meeting, he alluded to it. Jerry just alluded to that. And I think to get this organization that we've all been involved in, the NAUA, I think we need to officially adopt that to get the organization growing and thriving, and then we can figure out ways to recruit new members, okay, that don't know anything about the rub between the 7 principles and the values with the word love and all of that stuff. and they don't know anything about it. They don't care about it. They just want to go to a church where whoever they are and whoever they vote for in elections, whatever they believe, whether they're a strident atheist like my wife, she felt at home in that little white church up in Blaine, Washington as a strident atheist, and I did as a traditional Unitarian that has a strong belief in God. And the thing that enabled us to feel secure there was the 7 principles. That protected both of us and everybody else that went there. It's kind of like the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the all the associated amendments. And so we need a structure, a foundation there to move forward with this new group that was founded by our founder, Todd Eckloff. But we need a structure for that to stand on, and that's how we're going to grow, I think. But
so for you, that structure is the 7 principles,
or something like it. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, something like that protects everybody's. Yeah. We know that a lot of us left the UUA and left our UUA congregations because of what happened. Like the church there in Blaine, they voted 18-1, and I think they voted because I was a sitting board member at the time, and I was every bit as insistent then, almost 2 years ago, as I am now about it, and they voted 18-1 to go against the change to Article 2, but then immediately thereafter, they just rolled over because they were muscled by the UUA back in Boston. They just rolled over and followed orders. And then they adopted the values with the word love in the middle. I felt like I was personally betrayed because I was the prime mover and shaker and seeing to it that the principles are kept by that little white church, and especially after an 18-1 vote. I know that's a small congregation, and that's how the vote went down. And I said, well, I just assumed whether the vote, no matter how the vote was going to go at GA last year, that I can't imagine they would go against the congregational vote, but they did, and I said, well, okay, they pulled the rug out, and I said, well, all right. And then Reverend Eckloff started that, but then I was disappointed because he was resistant to the principles as well, and that disappointed me, quite frankly. But I'm still here because I want to see this organization that we've all been involved in to thrive and grow. And if you're not growing, you're dying. So we need to grow.
Mark has just put in the chat, I know he is a member of the board, and he said the NAUA board is considering reopening discussion about whether to adopt a statement of principles. If you feel strongly, please let them know and get involved.
Okay.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from Patricia.
I think she's muted.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. We just did a circle about a week or two ago talking about the principles, and everybody, whether or not you call them the principles or aspirations or whatever you want to call them, and whether or not you have 7 or 5, I would love to see the NAUA take out after those and rephrase them, update them if necessary, and make them our own. Because my problem with my congregation is when Article 2 blew up, I was chair of the Denomination Connections Committee, and we did a lot of congregational discussions about what was going on. But my congregation right now still gives money every year to UUA, even though they understand we're getting virtually nothing from them. And even though I'm still head of the committee, I have nothing to do with UUA because I'm just not going to work with them. I know where they're going. But that said, 2 weeks ago, I delivered a sermon that I call Truth and Tolerance. And I tried to take the approach. Well, the approach I did take is a pox on both their houses, both the right and the left, on this situation. Because I don't want to be called a bigot because I don't agree with gender affirming care for 5-year-olds. and that's the kind of, you get into that kind of dogmatic beliefs, which is where the UUA is right now. And but when you talk to people about this, it's very difficult to get across how important these concepts and how they change the way you look at the world. That's what I'm looking. I want NAUA to have principles or aspirations or something that I can point to. When somebody came up to me afterwards, I got a really good reception from my congregation to this sermon, and I was really leery that I wouldn't, that enough people would say, "Boy, do you sound like a bigot." Uh, in fact, the only negative I got was from a guy from New York who was visiting and said I was a right-wing extremist after he heard me talk. But anyway, New Yorkers have always been very blunt. Um, but I got generally really good comments from everybody else who said they felt the same way about the way it was going. But that doesn't mean they're not going to give money to the UUA. And that money could be going to NAUA as far as I'm concerned. The problem here, and I'll get down to it finally, I don't know what to tell people about the NAUA. They're not a service organization. And of course, the services that UUA provides now are ones I don't want. I would never serve on a search committee where they went to the UUA looking for ministers, because I know what those people are trained in now, and it's nothing I want to hear. But most of my congregation, in spite of all of our discussions and sermons like I've given, and them understanding what this ideology means and how it's kind of the death of Western Enlightenment individualism, I don't think they can quite believe that's where UUA is now. And the main point is they don't know what NAUA is. And I don't know, I can't articulate it well enough to tell them either, because we've got a whole bunch of people on the West Coast. I'm in the South. I'm not going to see people or have any kind of intimate relationship with anybody except on Zoom, unless I fly out to Seattle, and it's the kind of thing of, what do you tell people about? What is the NAUA? What is it there for? Is it there just to have Zoom meetings so you can do what I'm doing right now and bounce off my beliefs? Or is there something they're going to provide for people like us? And if so, what is it? So, that's where I stand with that.
Well, I would argue it is a service organization, but it is not providing yet all the services that perhaps you're wanting. But education in the academy, the support group for ministers, the International Alliance, there are some services, but it's apparently not speaking enough to you. I understand that, Patricia.
Well, I've heard that didn't come directly from me. Several people have said they didn't intend to be a service organization, and I just took them at their word. I know about academies and that kind of thing, but
Yeah.
I'd love, I mean, if they could have ministers that were trained in liberal religion again, that would be wonderful.
Yes. Thank you. Let's hear from Alan.
Okay, so I'm going to cover 2 points. The first point relates to like the things that Reverend Kerr mentioned about Flint. I'm in a congregation, a smaller one, and all of our people who had voted to oppose the Article 2 revisions, and that we were going to retain the 7 principles and 6 sources for our own congregation, even if the UUA changed, which they did vote to make that change. We subsequently did put those into our bylaws, and we also incorporated, approval for joining NAUA as well as staying with the UUA. And so, and those changes were made, and now my congregation's a member of the NAUA as well as UUA. So that's one point I just wanted to make, that there are other congregations like that around. And the other thing is, with regard to the original topic, back when you had a culture like in the middle part of the last century where most people were going to church, that was in one way helpful to Unitarians, because if people felt they had some kind of social pressure or so forth to be members of a religious congregation, even if they were not really strong, devotees of a particular theology, they might very well say, well, Unitarian Universalists were a place that they could find home in a culture like that, to expect a lot of church attendance, even, and they wouldn't have to subscribe to a specific creedal things. So that a little bit of that has been lost as more people are not going to church. On the other hand, so long as there's a large number of people who are unaffiliated, and as people change through their lives, some of those people may, for various reasons, whether it be pure community or because they're spiritually searching and feel that it might do better doing that in a congregational community where they can explore different ideas. As long as there's a lot of people out there who are unaffiliated, we still have opportunities to potentially reach those people. And the question is, what is the best way? So some things, as I said, have been lost from a former culture, but as long as there's a lot of unaffiliates, there's potential. So, okay, enough said.
Yes, there's potential. Thank you. Steve?
Yes, thanks. I just wanted to mention that my congregation in Erie, Pennsylvania, is still a member of the UUA. A lot of us have grave concerns about what was done to the article in the Article 2 revisions. But we have the 7 principles stenciled around our sanctuary. We've officially adopted them as part of our congregational bylaws with, I think, unanimous support. We don't feel at all restricted in appealing to them, which we do on a regular basis. Our big concern is whether the UUA will come after, in Article 3, congregational autonomy. If they try to tell us how to run our congregation, I think we'll bolt. I really do. And I think that the UUA has been slow to actually get to Article 3 revisions, even though they've had a task force working on it for a couple of years now, because they're aware of the danger of serious blowback. And so they've moved on to Article 4 and 5, which are much less interesting, at least much less troubling, potentially troubling. I don't know anybody else, my final point, in our congregation who is part of the NAUA. I may be the only person that attends any of these meetings, but I'm not sure about that. We just don't talk about it much at all. So I don't quite know how this is all going to play out. But the UUA has been sufficiently helpful to our congregation by providing materials that we can use in our services. There's something called Soul Matters, SOUL, that gets used a lot. I'm no longer involved in Sunday Services Committee, so I'm not sure how they're doing this. But the attitude is, if they leave us the hell alone and give us a few useful services, we'll give them their couple $1,000s a year, and that's pretty much it. Joyce, I think you're muted now.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
there was some noise in the background. I do hope they continue to leave you alone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Kathy and David?
Yes. First of all, I wanted to thank the North American Unitarian Association for coming into being, regardless of what the motivation or what the spur of that coming into being was. We have enjoyed it a lot. We find that the services are wonderful. The educational component, extremely well done, and a very attractive virtual experience. And there's nothing wrong with experience being virtual. Now in Canada, we didn't have quite the same controversy as you have in the United States with the 8 principles. I think partly because they worded it quite differently and they approached it quite differently. But having said that, the 7 principles seem to me enough. And if you consider them in interaction with each other. You'll find that there's some delightful tensions between them that actually are features rather than bugs, and provide wonderful opportunities for not just, well, spiritual growth, if that's your direction or the way you want to self-understand, or, certainly for intellectual growth, and, certainly lots of opportunity. I think a lot of international organizations are thriving in the virtual sphere, and there's a lot of richness to possibilities. I think the NAUA is doing a wonderful job, and I hope it continues to have self-confidence in that wonder can be virtual and doesn't necessarily have to take place on a face-to-face basis. Having said that, I think you'll find that there's stages to organizations. NAUA is relatively new. It started off as a virtual organization supporting, some on the ground or congregations. And I think you'll find as time goes on that more on the ground, face-to-face sort of congregational settings will align themselves with the NAUA and provide that sort of physical, contact possibility that some of you have talked about as yearning, So I see all those possibilities ahead, and given the crazy, crazy world we're living in right now, Unitarian Universalism could not be needed more. So I hope we stick it out and keep fighting.
Yes. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. Dick.
Yeah, I follow what's going on in the UA probably more closely than most people.
You do.
Yeah, and I was trying to sort of figure out well, what's the really strikes me as the biggest real difference in practice, and I think I saw this pretty clearly at the last General Assembly when there was discussion of actions of immediate witness and congregational study action issues, and it was very clear that the UUA board and that the people in power right now, you might say, have explicitly abandoned our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It's all their core priority now is still woke identity politics. And for example, there was one CSAI which got passed, the one on prisons, but it wasn't just on prisons. It was about abolish prisons, and it used very extreme language, which is very familiar, from dismantle this, dismantle racism, whatever like that. And the extreme language comes with it, with the idea that if you disagree this, you're not acceptable. You're not being an advocate of justice or morality, and that's to me is how they are abandoning the first principle. Instead of saying, yeah, we can accept disagreement and different approaches, we're going to go rah, abolish the prisons, and if you complain, you're not acceptable. We're going to call you out or cancel you in some way. And that's still the reality. It came up also in the thing on fatness. They passed a new resolution supporting a fatness group. And but again, and there was a CSAI proposal on that. But you look how they went about it. I raised the issues and some of the discussion groups is, well, this fatness is not just a one-sided thing. How about issues of health? Well, they didn't want to discuss that. It was all sort of a one-sided grievance-based approach. You've got these people, this oppressed group, so to speak, the fat people, deserve our prioritization, and if you don't go along with, affirming them, or if you want to say, well, let's look at health and other things like that and have a rational discussion, you're not acceptable. We're not going to allow you to be part of the conversation. And so I think there's a real strong difference there when you come to this woke identity politics. They're still with that. But
Yeah.
the other thing that goes along with that is though you see it like at the GA, but you get outside of that, even at the GA when they can't, they try to suppress any discussion of this. In the congregations, they won't talk about this. They try to hide it in every way they can. They want to sort of rule from a point of view of secrecy and censorship. But again, that's very clear at the GA, most clearly there, where they can't really censor everything, even though they appoint censors. They don't call them that, but people who monitor discussions, who are supposed to prevent harm, they're actually are censors. And
Yeah.
I've been censored, and other people have been censored without any rational recourse or discussion, or it's just an arbitrary process. So when you talk about the differences, there are some really clear differences with the NAUA, does actually practice open discussion, and it doesn't try to censor these things. It doesn't try to adopt extremist kind of language and positions. It tries to leave it open so we can still discuss those things.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. We have Bob and Mark, and then we probably need to wrap up. And Mark, you can take it from there. Let's hear from Bob. Oh, and you both are on the board.
Yes, I'm on the board too. Yeah, I did want to chime in about the 7 principles. That is something we have discussed. I've always been a big proponent of it. I mean, I've been in sessions like this for years, and I've heard what the members said. They want something to give us more identity than freedom, reason, and tolerance. So, I see us addressing it more, perhaps getting a group of people to come up with some ideas that probably won't be the exact identical as the UUA 7 principles. It might be 5 principles or 5 smooth stones. I've heard somebody mention something like that. So I think it's something we'd all get excited about doing this year. Another thing I wanted to mention to Patricia, she said she's in South Carolina. She doesn't think she's all alone there. I've got access to our member database. I just did a survey or a quick search. I see 12 people in South Carolina, 4 people in Columbia, South Carolina, where you are. There's Karen and Rod Brown. I don't know if you know them, and Regina Moody. But we do make these lists of people in the area available to you if people ask, as long as you've got the option, you personally have the option to opt out of this type of sharing of people. But when we do get these requests, we do make it available for people that want to try to form regional groups. So if that's something you're interested, Patricia, you can just let us know.
Huh.
I do know they're dear friends.
Okay,
So
there you go. Okay.
Oh, good.
So you're not all alone. Okay.
You're not. That's a good reminder. Thank you, Bob. Mark, I think you'll be our last comment, and we need to wind down here, I think.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you all for your attention, and thank you, Joyce, for a very engaging presentation and leading quite an engaging discussion. And I will, assuming I can figure this out, so just make a note that we are at the moment a member service organization, although we've had some discussion this evening about whether we should continue to be just that. But we're dedicated to supporting and promoting liberal religion. And we would like your support. So again, you may pledge a donation or recurrent pledge. And I think this QR code, if you can get it, if you can get your phone to take a picture of it, will actually take you to our website. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. Some other events coming up. So the NAUA Book Club will meet Thursday, December 18. We'll actually be reading a contrarian book by the current head of the FDA. The NAUA third Saturday worship service will be in, I guess, 12 days from now. Saturday, is it 12 days or 8 days? Probably 12 days from now. And then we will have the discussion circles starting up first Wednesday in January. We'll take a January pause for the Academy, so we'll have the next one February 10th. We'll also have the forum discussion circle I believe it'll be the 18th of January, and that'll be on the social impacts of artificial intelligence. And some of you were there for our first part of that discussion 2 days ago. So we look forward to seeing you again. And that's just about it. Again, thank you, Joyce. Very nice presentation. And thank you all for your attention and comments.
All right. Good night. Mark, I assume you'll
Thank
stop
you.
the
Good night.
recording and send it to John Wonderland to post.
Yeah, we'll do.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night. Very good.
Good night.
Good night.